Barbara's hands were shaking so violently she nearly dropped Rooney twice before they reached the diner door. Not from the cold, though December had turned vicious that week. Not from fear, though she had plenty of that. Her hands shook because she hadn't eaten in 3 days, and her 5-year-old son, gripping her fingers with his small, chapped hand, hadn't had a real meal in 5. The world tilted slightly as she pushed open the glass door. Colors bled at the edges of her vision. The warmth inside the diner hit her like a wall, and with it came smells so overwhelming she had to steady herself against the doorframe. Coffee, bacon grease, butter melting on toast. Her stomach clenched so hard it hurt, a physical pain that shot through her abdomen and made her gasp softly. Rooney looked up at her, his dark eyes too knowing, too worried for a kindergartner who should only understand cartoons and playground games. She had 23 cents in her pocket. She'd counted it 7 times that morning in the broken-down station wagon they'd been sleeping in for the past 9 weeks. 23 cents wouldn't buy a napkin in this place. But the cold had become dangerous, deadly even, and Rooney's lips had gone from pink to purple during their 4-mile walk after the car's engine finally seized completely, smoke pouring from beneath the hood like a funeral pyre for their last piece of stability. Barbara hadn't come to eat. That fantasy had died weeks ago, somewhere between the eviction and the food bank running out of supplies and the job application that made it to the final round before they chose someone else, someone without gaps in their resume, someone who had an address to put on the paperwork. She'd come because the public library wouldn't open for another 90 minutes, and she could see Rooney's breath in the air, could feel him shivering against her even though she'd wrapped him in every piece of clothing they owned. Just 10 minutes. That's all she needed. 10 minutes for the feeling to return to his fingers. 10 minutes to pretend they were regular people stopping by for breakfast before school and work. 10 minutes before someone noticed them and asked them to leave or, worse, looked at them with that particular blend of pity and disgust she'd come to recognize in the eyes of strangers who'd never missed a meal. She guided Rooney toward the back corner booth, the one partially hidden by a support beam and closest to the emergency exit. Strategic positioning. She'd learned to think like this now, always planning the quickest escape, always aware of who was watching. The vinyl seat was patched with gray tape, and Rooney climbed onto it carefully, his thin legs dangling. His jacket, donated from some church clothing drive, was 2 sizes too big, and his sneakers had holes near the toes that she tried to patch with duct tape. But when he looked around the diner, his face still held wonder. That destroyed her more than anything else. That he could still find magic in a world that had shown him nothing but hardship. Before we continue, if you believe in the power of compassion to change everything, take 3 seconds right now to hit that like button, share this story with one person who needs to hear it today, and subscribe so we can spread more hope together. Your single click might be the encouragement someone else needs to extend their hand to a stranger. Barbara started whispering to Rooney about pretend feasts, spinning elaborate tales about stacks of blueberry pancakes as tall as buildings, hot chocolate with marshmallows floating like clouds, crispy hash browns that crunched when you bit them. Maybe next week, she told him. Maybe soon. But Rooney had stopped listening. His attention had snagged on something across the narrow aisle. A man sat alone 4 booths away, and he looked like he'd stepped out of a different universe entirely. Mid-40s, Barbara guessed, with silver threading through his dark hair, and a wool coat that probably cost what she used to make in 2 months when she still had her accounting job. Everything about him spoke of a life carefully maintained. Pressed shirt, polished shoes, clean-shaven jaw. His name was Ethan Mitchell, though Barbara didn't know that yet. What she also didn't know was that despite his appearance of having everything together, Ethan was barely holding on. 18 months earlier, his husband had collapsed during their morning run. A massive heart attack at 42. Gone before the ambulance arrived. Since then, Ethan had moved through life like a ghost, going through motions, showing up places without really being present. He came to this diner most mornings not because he was hungry, but because eating alone at home meant staring at the empty chair across from him, and that was a pain he still couldn't face. Ethan became aware of them only when he felt eyes on his food. He looked up to find Rooney staring at his breakfast plate with an intensity that made Ethan's chest tighten. The boy wasn't begging, wasn't reaching. He was simply looking at the untouched omelet, the golden home fries, the wheat toast glistening with butter, with an expression that spoke of deprivation so profound it had become normal. It was a look no child should ever master, hunger that had moved past complaint into silent acceptance. Barbara noticed where Rooney's gaze had landed and felt humiliation burn through her like acid. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over the empty water glass someone had left on the table. "We need to go, sweetheart," she said, her voice cracking despite her efforts to sound normal. She couldn't do this. Couldn't sit here being pitted by people who had everything while she had nothing. They'd already endured enough judgment from former colleagues who'd stopped answering her calls, from shelter workers who'd turned them away because they were full, from people who seemed to believe that poverty was a personal failure rather than a circumstance. She turned toward the exit, keeping her head down, praying to become invisible. But Ethan was watching. He saw the newspaper stuffed inside her torn shoes for insulation. He saw the way her coat hung on her frame, at least 2 sizes too large now. He saw the little boy's eyes, still fixed on food that Ethan had barely touched, that he'd ordered only out of habit rather than hunger. Something shifted inside him, something that had been frozen solid since the funeral suddenly cracked. His hand moved before his mind fully processed the decision, waving to catch the server's attention. Barbara had made it 3 steps from the booth when she heard the waitress call out, "Ma'am, wait just a second." Barbara froze, every muscle tensing for confrontation. The waitress approached with a gentle smile that seemed genuine. The gentleman near the window asked if you and your son would care to have breakfast. He'd like to cover it, no strings attached. The words hit Barbara like a slap. Her face went hot with shame. Every fiber of her being wanted to refuse, to walk out with whatever shreds of dignity she still possessed. But then Rooney's hand tightened around hers, and she felt the tremor running through his small body, and she knew she couldn't let pride starve her child. She turned slowly. Ethan met her eyes and gave a small nod. Not patronizing, not performative, just a simple gesture that communicated, "Please, it's okay." They sat. When the waitress placed a plate of chocolate chip pancakes in front of Rooney, his entire expression transformed. Joy, pure and uncomplicated, flooded his face, and he let out a small laugh of disbelief. That sound hit Ethan like a physical force, a reminder that happiness still existed in the world, that simple kindness could create it. Barbara managed to whisper her thanks, though her voice broke and tears welled in her eyes despite her desperate efforts to hold them back. She turned toward the window, pretending to watch the traffic, but Ethan saw her shoulders shake, saw her wipe her eyes with the threadbare sleeve of her coat. Nobody spoke for a while. The diner hummed with morning energy around them. Dishes clinked. The espresso machine hissed. Conversations rose and fell like waves. Rooney ate slowly, reverently, savoring each bite as if it might be his last. Watching him, Ethan thought of Marcus, his late husband, who had volunteered at soup kitchens every Thursday, who had believed that everyone deserved dignity regardless of their circumstances. Ethan used to tell him he was too idealistic, too naive about human nature. Sitting here now, watching this mother and son, Ethan realized that Marcus had understood something essential that Ethan was only beginning to grasp. When the plates were empty, Barbara tried to pay, her hands fumbling with coins she'd pulled from her pocket. Ethan gently raised his hand. "Please don't. It's already handled," he said quietly, his tone conveying respect rather than charity. Barbara looked down, shame and gratitude warring across her features. As she helped Rooney into his oversized jacket, Ethan glanced through the window and saw their car in the lot, hood slightly raised, clearly dead. Without overthinking, he followed them outside. Barbara refused his help initially, her pride making her voice sharp. But after the engine refused to respond despite multiple attempts, she stepped aside reluctantly. Ethan worked quietly, checking connections, testing systems, his movements methodical. When the engine finally coughed to life, Rooney clapped and cheered, his face radiant with happiness. Barbara's smile appeared then, fragile and disbelieving, as if she'd forgotten such expressions were still available to her. She thanked him, her voice barely audible. Before walking away, Ethan pulled out a business card and wrote on the back, "If you ever need anything at all," he said, pressing it into her palm. Barbara stared at the card as if it might vanish. It had his name, number, and an address written in neat handwriting. She didn't think she'd ever use it. But that night, as freezing rain pounded the car and Rooney shivered despite being wrapped in everything they had, she found herself holding that card again, her fingers tracing the ink. She couldn't explain what made her dial. Desperation, maybe, or the memory of being treated like a human being for the first time in months. But she called. Ethan answered immediately. 45 minutes later, he stood beside their car in the downpour, holding a large umbrella and carrying bags of hot food. He didn't ask questions, didn't demand explanations. He simply opened the door and said softly, "You both deserve somewhere warm and safe tonight." He drove them to a guest cottage behind the farmhouse he'd inherited from his parents. Inside, it smelled like cedar and fresh laundry, impossibly clean and warm. After Rooney fell asleep in a real bed for the first time in months, Barbara sat on the floor and cried, her whole body releasing months of accumulated fear and exhaustion. Outside, Ethan stood in the hallway listening to a child breathe peacefully, and something in him that had felt permanently destroyed began, very slowly, to heal. Days turned into weeks. Barbara found ways to contribute without being asked. She'd organize the main house, prepare meals, tend the overgrown garden. Ethan never requested it, but he'd come home to find fresh bread cooling on the counter and drawings from Rooney taped to the refrigerator, stick figures labeled Mr. Ethan and Me and Mama. Gradually, their separate losses became the bridge between them. Barbara shared how she'd lost her career when her company downsized, how she had no family to turn to, how she'd fought daily to preserve hope for Rooney when she had none for herself. Ethan opened up about Marcus, about how grief had hollowed him out, how he'd been existing rather than living. Winter melted into spring. The land came alive with green and color. Rooney started calling Ethan Uncle Ethan. Sometimes Barbara would catch Ethan watching her son play with an expression of tenderness that reminded her that good people still existed. And though neither acknowledged it directly, both felt something growing between them that resembled family. Eventually, Barbara secured a position at a local elementary school working in their after-school program, and Ethan helped her get the car properly repaired. She began to believe again, not just in survival but in possibility. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant oranges and purples, Ethan came home to find Barbara and Rooney baking cookies, both covered in flour. Rooney looked up with sparkling eyes and announced, "Uncle Ethan, guess what? Mama says this is our home now forever." Barbara's face flushed with embarrassment at her son's proclamation, but Ethan only smiled. He looked at them both, the woman who had taught him to feel again and the child who had reminded him why living mattered, and said softly, "I really hope it is." That evening, they returned to the same diner where everything had begun. Same booth, same warm lights, but this time Barbara didn't try to hide. She laughed freely. Rooney giggled between bites, and Ethan's heart, once shattered beyond recognition, felt whole again. If the story touched something in you, please like this video, share it with your world, and subscribe to our channel. Let this remind you that kindness costs nothing but means everything. Drop a comment below saying compassion wins, if you believe one act of grace can transform everything. As the diner's lights glowed softly around them, Ethan understood something profound. Sometimes prayers aren't answered through miracles or divine intervention. They're answered through people, through the courage to extend a hand, through the willingness to see another person's humanity. Barbara and Rooney had been his answer, and he had been theirs.